Massive American bomber, engines roaring at 35,000 feet, releases a weapon the world has never seen in combat before. A 5,000-pound steel cylinder the size of a small car drops from the aircraft and accelerates toward the Iranian coastline at supersonic speed. GPS guides it with millimeter precision. It does not explode on contact. It plunges through reinforced concrete, through packed earth, through the roof of a hardened underground tunnel where Iran has hidden the very missiles it has been using to choke the world's most important waterway. And then deep underground, where no daylight reaches, it detonates. Iran thought it had the Strait of Hormuz locked down forever. The United States just proved the regime catastrophically wrong. What is happening in and around the Strait of Hormuz is not simply a regional conflict. It is a battle for the global economy itself. This is a waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply passes every single day. For the past several weeks, that flow has been reduced to almost nothing because Iran believed it could hold the world hostage from behind its coastal missile batteries. On March 17th, the United States gave that belief a 5,000-pound answer. To appreciate why this matters, it is necessary to understand exactly what happened, exactly what weapon was used, why it is so extraordinary, and exactly what comes next, because the story is far from over. Let us start with the basics. U.S. Central Command, known as CENTCOM, released a statement in the late hours of that evening that was characteristically terse but absolutely enormous in its implications. Hours ago, CENTCOM announced that American forces had successfully employed multiple 5,000-pound deep penetrator munitions on hardened Iranian missile sites along Iran's coastline near the Strait of Hormuz. The command added that the Iranian anti-ship cruise missiles housed in those sites had posed a direct risk to international shipping in the strait. The statement was simple, clear, and historically significant in ways that most people have not yet fully grasped. To understand why this matters, it is necessary to understand what Iran has been doing in the Strait of Hormuz. Since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th, the Islamic Republic has deployed a layered strategy of maritime aggression that has been brutally effective. Fast boats, essentially weaponized speedboats armed with sea-skimming missiles, have been darting in and out of shipping lanes to terrorize any merchant vessel daring enough to attempt the crossing. Drones have been launched in swarms to overwhelm defenses. Naval mines have been seeded across the waterway. The United States intelligence community now assesses that there are at least a dozen Iranian mines currently positioned in the strait. It is the anti-ship cruise missiles that represent the most dangerous long-term threat. Iran has constructed a formidable network of these weapons along its southern coastline. The Ghadir and Qadr missiles, mounted on road mobile trucks, can strike targets at ranges between 12 and 186 miles. That range covers the entire length of the Strait of Hormuz from one end to the other. Then there is the Abu Mahdi cruise missile, which can reach targets up to 621 miles away, extending Iran's potential strike envelope far beyond the strait itself. Add to this the Hormuz 2 anti-ship ballistic missiles, both with ranges of 186 miles and equipped with satellite navigation for tracking moving ships, and the result is a threat matrix of extraordinary complexity and lethality. The problem the United States has been wrestling with is that while you can target missiles in the open and hunt road mobile launchers from the air, the most dangerous launch sites are not in the open. They are buried underground, dug into mountainsides, reinforced with concrete, hidden beneath layers of packed earth. You cannot reach those sites with a standard bomb or with a conventional missile strike. To reach those sites, you need something entirely different. That is where the GBU-72 enters the story. Before getting into the extraordinary capabilities of this weapon, it is worth being clear about the scale of the disruption Iran has caused. At least 20 ships have been attacked in and around the Strait of Hormuz since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. Before the war, more than 100 vessels per day were transiting the strait. As of recent reporting, the average has collapsed to just 3 or 4 ships daring the crossing each day. One oil market analyst captured the shock of this moment perfectly when describing that the classic line everyone had always held was that the strait was too big to fail and would never close, and that Western or Allied naval powers would never allow it to happen. It has happened. Oil prices have surged above $100 per barrel multiple times since the conflict began. The International Energy Agency has described the disruption as the largest supply shock in the history of the oil market. Iran calculated that this economic pain would force the United States to call off Operation Epic Fury. That calculation was a mistake. Now let us talk about the GBU-72. Its formal designation is the GBU-72 Advanced 5,000-Pound Penetrator. It was developed by the United States Air Force beginning in 2017, specifically to replace the aging GBU-28, a 5,000-pound bunker buster that had been in service since the 1991 Gulf War. The Air Force unveiled the new weapon publicly in October 2021 when it announced that a GBU-72 had been successfully released from an F-15E Strike Eagle during tests at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. That test series, which included the first ever loading, flight, and release of the weapon, was described by the Air Force as a complete success. The program manager stated at the time that lethality was expected to be substantially higher compared to similar legacy weapons such as the GBU-28. How much higher? The legacy GBU-28 could penetrate 15 feet of reinforced concrete and approximately 150 feet of earth before detonating. The GBU-72 is capable of plunging through 100 feet of earth and 22 feet of solid concrete before its delayed fuse triggers the explosion. That performance represents a dramatic upgrade in penetration capability. Critically, unlike general-purpose bombs that are designed to fragment on impact, the GBU-72's elongated steel body must remain structurally intact long enough to burrow through layers of reinforcement before releasing its full explosive force underground. That is the engineering challenge, and the United States has solved it. The GBU-72 combines a penetrating warhead with a variant of the Joint Direct Attack Munition Tail Kit, the same guidance system used for 2,000-pound bunker busters. That tail kit integrates GPS and inertial navigation systems, allowing the bomb to be launched from standoff range, meaning the aircraft dropping it does not need to fly directly over the target. That matters enormously when operating in contested airspace. In a further detail that speaks to the weapon's design pedigree, the warhead appears to use the same combination of explosives found in the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, the 30,000-pound bomb that the United States has already used against Iran's Taliban II nuclear facility. The United States has found an explosive formula that works and has scaled it across its entire bunker-busting arsenal. The strike on March 17th represented the first combat use of the GBU-72. This was the first time this particular weapon had been used in operation. The significance of this cannot be overstated. What this means is that Iran has now had direct exposure to the consequences of this weapon on its own soil. The delivery of these weapons to Iran's underground missile sites is itself a story worth telling. The GBU-72 is currently certified for use on 2 platforms, the F-15E Strike Eagle and the B-1B Lancer strategic bomber. The F-15E, which is deployed across multiple bases within CENTCOM's area of responsibility, can carry 1 GBU-72 on its centerline station without sacrificing its external fuel tanks. The B-1B Lancer, by contrast, can carry up to 12 GBU-72s at once. Flight tracking data recorded 2 B-1B sorties departing RAF Fairford in the United Kingdom on March 17th. Aircraft positioning data showed 2 of the bombers flying between Cyprus and Israel en route to Iran and returning to Fairford at a timeline that matched the CENTCOM statement precisely. Some analysts speculate that the United States may have dropped as many as 48 GBU-72s across the Strait of Hormuz missile sites in that single operation. If that figure is even close to accurate, the B-1Bs would have been essential to delivering that volume of firepower. The round trip from RAF Fairford to the Strait of Hormuz is approximately 8,500 kilometers, which speaks to the logistical ambition of the entire operation. The goal of these strikes was not simply to destroy the missiles themselves. As confirmed in a March 19th Pentagon press conference, the primary targets were the underground storage facilities and the tunnels connecting those facilities to Iran's coastal launch positions. The United States military dropped 5,000-pound penetrator weapons into the underground storage facilities, storing coastal defense cruise missiles and other support equipment. The logic is straightforward. You do not need to destroy every missile in Iran's inventory. You do not need to hunt down every road mobile launcher. What you need to do is collapse the tunnels and seal the doors through which Iran moves those launchers to their firing positions. Take out the infrastructure and the missiles become useless. They are powerful weapons, but without a way to get them into the open, they are just very expensive metal sitting underground. The GBU-72 has turned Iran's most carefully constructed defensive network into an expensive liability. It is worth pausing to put all of this in the broader context of Operation Epic Fury. The United States has not been relying solely on the GBU-72. It has deployed an escalating ladder of munitions across Iran since the operation began on February 28th. 2,000-pound GBU-31 JDAM bunker busters have been in constant use, with observers photographing enormous stockpiles of these weapons at RAF Fairford. The 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator, a weapon so large it can only be carried by the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, has already been used against the Taliban II nuclear facility. According to research centers tracking the conflict, the combined strikes have now degraded approximately 85% of Iran's air defense network. That degradation is not incidental, it is a precondition. The GBU-72 is a stand-in weapon. It works most effectively when enemy air defenses have been suppressed, and that condition now exists in Iran. So where does this leave the Strait of Hormuz? This is where the story becomes even more extraordinary and even more fluid. A recent statement from the CENTCOM commander removed any ambiguity about American intentions. The statement emphasized that pilots across the board are dynamically hunting threats, finding and eliminating targets in real time, and that the United States will not stop pursuing these targets. The description was of a force zeroed in on dismantling every element of Iran's capacity to threaten free commerce in the Strait. On the same day, Reuters reported that Iran had announced it was opening the strait to all vessels except those it deemed enemy-linked. Iran's government spokesperson responded to American pressure by warning that if Iran's power plants were targeted, the critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and oil facilities throughout the region would be considered legitimate targets and would be destroyed in an irreversible manner, and that the price of oil would remain high for a long time. The diplomatic and economic reverberations were immediate. Markets swung violently. Oil prices spiked, then collapsed. Iran's response was defiant. State television declared that the United States had retreated out of fear of Iran's response. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps warned that if power plants were struck, Iran would retaliate against the power plants of regional countries supplying electricity to American bases. Iranian state-aligned media reported that the country's parliament was planning to formalize fees denominated in yuan for ships passing through the strait. But behind the rhetoric, something was shifting. A deadline was extended multiple times with statements citing very good and productive conversations with Iran. Talks were ongoing, and despite erroneous statements to the contrary, they were described as going very well. Iran's response to the American peace proposal was sent through intermediaries, calling for an end to attacks on Iran and on Iranian-backed groups across the region, the payment of war reparations, and respect for Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Those demands place Iran far beyond anything contained in the American proposal. The gap between the two sides remains vast. Iran's foreign ministry simultaneously denied that any direct negotiations had taken place, calling the deadline extension part of efforts to reduce energy prices and buy time to implement military plans. Meanwhile, Israeli forces were accelerating their targeting of Iranian arms factories in Isfahan and other cities, apparently racing to do as much damage as possible before any potential ceasefire. Israel's defense minister confirmed that the IRGC Navy's commander, the man directly responsible for orchestrating the maritime blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, had been killed in an overnight strike. Iran did not immediately acknowledge the killing. What does all of this add up to? It adds up to a situation of extraordinary danger and extraordinary opportunity simultaneously. The GBU-72 strikes have fundamentally altered the balance of power along the Strait of Hormuz coastline. Iran's most carefully constructed and most threatening weapon system, the hardened underground missile launch infrastructure it spent years and enormous resources building, has been exposed as vulnerable to American air power in ways that Tehran almost certainly did not anticipate. The psychological dimension of that exposure should not be underestimated. If Iran cannot protect what is buried deep underground, what exactly can it protect? And yet the conflict is far from resolved. The strait remains functionally closed to most international shipping. Oil prices remain elevated. The diplomatic talks are fragile and contested. Iran is still threatening, still firing missiles at Israel and Gulf states, still seeding the waterway with mines. The B-1Bs are still at RAF Fairford. The CENTCOM commander has said the United States will not stop. The world is watching to see whether diplomacy or air power will ultimately determine the fate of the world's most strategically important stretch of water. Here is what we know for certain right now. The GBU-72 has been used in combat. It performed. It destroyed what Iran spent years building and protecting. And if the diplomatic window closes, if the deadline passes without a resolution, there is every reason to believe that more of those 5,000-pound underground messengers will find their way to the targets that the United States military's intelligence assets are currently mapping across the Iranian coastline. There is one more dimension to this story that deserves attention. An unexpected actor has entered the Strait of Hormuz equation: Ukraine. As the United States and Gulf states grapple with Iranian drone threats in and around the strait, Ukrainian interceptor drone technology forged in years of combat against Russian aerial attacks is emerging as a potential contribution to the fight. Ukraine has developed sophisticated battle-proven capabilities in drone interception that could prove highly relevant in the Hormuz theater. The strategic context, the technical details, the geopolitical stakes all converge in this moment. Because the bottom line is this: the world is changing rapidly and consequentially around the Strait of Hormuz. A weapon that nobody had seen used in combat before March 17th has just reshaped the military calculus across an entire region. The world's most important oil corridor is under active negotiation between the world's most powerful military and a regime that is simultaneously defiant and desperate. And a clock is ticking down to a deadline that will determine whether the strait reopens or whether the conflict escalates further.
International social media Patel Prahad be subscribe, watching after subscribe, Truth Report.